Hey everyone, welcome back. Have you ever had someone promise you stability, then pull the rug out when you least expect it? A former boss who hired you, praised you, promoted you, then fired you and evicted you the moment her own drinking started spiraling, and then later texted asking you to finish her tattoo? A middle school that tried to fix hallway congestion with painted traffic lanes, only to have students turn the whole thing into a rush hour simulation complete with drag racing and parking tickets? A couple who bought an old farmhouse with a historic cemetery on the land, only to have the town try to turn their backyard into a public nature trail. Today we've got 3 stories about people who thought they could control situations they didn't fully understand, and the unexpected ways those plans fell apart. Here we go. She hired me, gave me a place to stay, then had me fired and evicted when her drinking got out of control. A few years ago, I got a call out of nowhere from a former boss I'll call Diana. At the time, I was between jobs and starting to feel the pressure because I was about to turn 26 and lose my parents' health insurance. She told me she had just become a GM at a store and needed an assistant manager. The pay was decent, the benefits matched what I was about to lose, and the PTO was actually better than most places I'd worked. It sounded like perfect timing, so I accepted pretty much on the spot. Around the same time, my boyfriend needed a place to stay, and Diana offered us a room in her house while we saved up for our own place. She even mentioned that once a position opened up, she could help him get a job at the store as well. It all felt like one of those rare situations where everything lines up too neatly. Stable job, temporary housing, and a clear path forward. We packed up and moved in thinking we had landed on our feet. What we didn't realize was that we were walking straight into a mess. The store she handled was barely holding together. The staff had been run down by a string of bad managers, morale was in the basement, and the numbers reflected it. On top of that, Diana herself was already slipping. We found out pretty quickly she'd started drinking again, but she kept it just subtle enough at first that it didn't fully register. Meanwhile, she had somehow maneuvered herself into control of 2 stores after getting another manager pushed out. I threw myself into the job because that's what I do. Within a month and a half, things started turning around fast. Sales were climbing, customer engagement was improving, and the staff actually started acting like they wanted to be there. I was working 10 to 12-hour days without blinking, sometimes even coming in on days the entire chain was technically closed just to get ahead. I also took over managing the store's social media and built a partnership with a bulk buyer that brought in steady traffic and free exposure. The praise came quickly and loudly. I was promoted to GM, given a $10,000 salary increase, and told I was exactly what the company needed. It felt like validation for all the work I'd been putting in. The numbers backed it up, too, with daily sales jumping by a few 100% compared to where the store had been before. From the outside, it looked like a success story. Behind the scenes, Diana was falling apart. She started pouring liquor into her coffee at 7 in the morning like it was normal. She'd disappear during the day under the excuse of running errands, but it didn't take long to realize she was going home, which was only a few minutes away, to drink. Items from the store would quietly show up in the house, things she hadn't paid for, things that were supposed to be inventory for a nonprofit thrift chain that supported a children's home. My boyfriend noticed it before I did, pointing out how certain items would just appear without explanation. It was getting bad, and the contrast between her behavior and the store's improvement wasn't subtle. Then one morning, everything flipped. 2 days earlier, Diana had suddenly told us we had 2 weeks to move out. No explanation, no build-up, just a random deadline dropped into conversation like it was nothing. After that, she barely spoke to us, and I didn't see her again until she showed up at my store one morning with our regional boss and someone from HR. The look on her face when she walked in was strange, like she hadn't expected to see me standing there. 20 minutes later, I was fired. The reasons they gave didn't make sense until I thought about where they came from. Every single issue they listed traced back to conversations I had had with Diana. One example they leaned on heavily was an incident with an employee I had disciplined. I'd called Diana immediately after it happened, explained the situation, and she told me I would have done the same thing. Somehow, that exact decision had turned into a key reason for my termination. Standing there, listening to it, it clicked. My boyfriend and I both came to the same conclusion later. Diana had set me up. I'd turned the store around, I was getting recognition, and she was spiraling in plain sight. The easiest way for her to take the pressure off herself was to redirect it onto me. Firing me and getting us out of her house cleaned up her immediate problem. It was messy, but it worked for her in the moment. We packed up what we could and ended up moving out of state to get back on our feet. The whole situation felt unreal for a while. One minute I was being praised and promoted, the next I was jobless and scrambling to figure out where to go. I didn't hear from Diana for a bit after that, which honestly was a relief. I figured whatever she had going on would catch up to her eventually, and I wanted no part of it. Then she texted me. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't even an acknowledgement of what had happened. It was a long message about how terrible her life had been, how everything had fallen apart, and how she had been fired not long after I was. It was all very woe is me, like she expected sympathy from the person she had just burned. And then at the end, she added, "You need to finish my tattoo." I actually laughed out loud when I read that. A while back, during one of her drunk spirals, she'd been talking about doing something reckless and dangerous, something involving people she knew who were tied to gangs. I had grabbed my equipment and started working on a tattoo for her, just to keep her distracted and calm. It wasn't ideal, but it kept her from making worse decisions that night. I never finished it because things got chaotic after that. Now she wanted me to come back and complete it. I didn't respond. There wasn't anything to say. She'd taken a situation where I trusted her, gave everything I had to her store, then turned it into something disposable the second it suited her. The tattoo was supposed to mean something at the time, some kind of shared trust and connection. Now it just represented exactly how that turned out. As far as I know, she's still walking around with it, only partially done, and that feels about right. This last line is quiet and perfect. You don't need revenge. You don't need an apology you'll never get. You just need to walk away and let her live with the consequences of her own choices. The tattoo will always be unfinished, her career imploded, her reputation is in tatters, and you rebuilt. That's not karma, that's just cause and effect. She made decisions, you made yours, and in the end, the person who needed to finish something wasn't you, it was her, and she couldn't. That's not your problem anymore, that's her tattoo. And our second story. Hallway rules backfired in the funniest way possible. Back in the 2014-2015 school year, I was teaching at a Title I middle school that had already gone through a full administrative reset. The state had stepped in, cleared out leadership, and replaced them with a new team that came in with a heavy fix-everything-now mindset. Every decision they made was about control, structure, and improving test scores as fast as possible. It didn't matter if the idea made sense in practice, as long as it looked good on paper. One of their big ideas was hallway traffic lanes. They taped lines across the floors, creating 2 one-way student lanes along the walls and a middle lane reserved strictly for teachers. We were told this would improve flow, reduce congestion, and get students to class faster. Staff were expected to enforce it, monitor intersections, and basically act like crossing guards inside the building. It felt excessive, but nobody was in the mood to argue with brand new admin trying to prove a point. For the first couple of days, students followed the system almost perfectly, but not in the way anyone expected. They started pretending they were driving cars. Kids were merging, using hand signals, letting each other go first, and even stopping at imaginary intersections. One student paused, waved another forward, and said, "You've got the right of way." It was honestly funny, and a few teachers played along for a bit just to keep things light. The problem was it slowed everything down. Students refused to pass each other because that's not how lanes work, and getting into classrooms became a full traffic situation. The biggest delay came from parking. Kids would reach their classroom and spend time backing into imaginary spots or attempting to parallel park. You'd hear little beep-beep noises while they adjusted. Meanwhile, the bell had already rung and they were still outside the door finishing their routine. Admin didn't find any of this entertaining. Within a week, they were handing out detentions for tardiness and blaming staff for not enforcing expectations properly. We were told to shut it down immediately and stop encouraging any kind of play behavior. That's when the students flipped from joking to full-on malicious compliance. Since they weren't allowed to cross the teacher lane, students started taking the longest routes possible just to follow the rules exactly. I watched one kid walk an entire hallway loop just to reach a locker 10 feet away. When asked why, he shrugged and said, "Can't cross the lane." There wasn't really anything to say to that. Then things escalated. Groups of kids formed buses, lining up with hands on shoulders and moving together through the halls. They'd call out stops like it was public transit and occasionally break down in the middle of intersections, blocking everyone. Others started drag racing down the longer hallways, complete with countdowns and engine noises. Some played cops, pulling over racers and writing fake tickets while traffic piled up behind them. Inside the classroom, it got worse. Students would ask to leave to check on their car or come back from the bathroom asking if anyone owned a certain vehicle because it was being towed. It became constant. The time between classes turned into the most important part of the day, and nobody cared about getting anywhere quickly anymore. Admin assumed it would die off on its own. Instead, tardiness got worse. After a few weeks, they quietly removed all the tape overnight. No announcement, no explanation, just gone. In its place, they shortened passing time by 2 minutes, forcing students to rush between classes with no time to mess around. The cars disappeared almost immediately, but the problems didn't. With less time and the same number of students, bathrooms became the new issue. Kids couldn't make it in time, started asking to leave constantly, and when that got denied, they found other ways to deal with it. Let's just say maintenance stayed busy for a while. All that effort to control hallway traffic ended up creating a system so ridiculous that middle schoolers turned it into a full transportation network just to prove a point. The final irony is that admin made everything worse. They started with a silly rule, then they punished kids for playing along, then they removed the rule but shortened passing time, creating a bathroom crisis that no one had anticipated. They tried to solve a problem that didn't exist and ended up with 2 new problems that did. The kids didn't disrupt the school, the administration did. The students just held up a mirror. And our last story. They tried to turn our land into a public trail. We bought our house about 5 months ago, and it honestly felt like something out of a storybook when we first saw it. It's an older place, 5 bedrooms, sitting on 10 acres just outside a small town where everyone knows everyone. The previous owners had let it sit vacant for about 2 years, so it needed work. But the bones were solid and the land was beautiful. The one detail that made people raise their eyebrows was the small cemetery tucked way back on the property, dating to the late 1700s and early 1800s. It wasn't visible from the road, and the only way to get to it was by walking through our land. At first, we didn't think much of it. We figured it was just one of those historic quirks that came with buying an old property. The graves were old, weathered, and honestly kind of peaceful, surrounded by trees and overgrowth. We cleaned it up a bit out of respect, cleared some brush, and made sure nothing was damaged. It felt like the right thing to do, even if no one had visited in years. Then word got out. Somehow people in town started talking about the old cemetery on the new couple's land, and suddenly it became this weird point of interest. It started small, with a few curious locals asking about it, but it escalated fast. About a week ago, we got contacted by someone from the city council asking if we'd be open to a meeting. That was the first moment I got a bad feeling, because small towns don't call meetings unless they want something. We sat down with them, and they laid out this whole plan like they were pitching a business deal. They wanted to create a nature trail that would run through our cemetery and loop around to connect with a nearby state park. They talked about community access, historical preservation, and tourism like it was some kind of win for everyone. My husband and I just looked at each other because all we heard was strangers wandering through our property whenever they felt like it. I asked, so people would just be walking through our land regularly? One of them smiled and said, well, it would be a designated path, of course. We'd make it respectful. My husband didn't even hesitate. No, we're not interested. We went home, talked it over again just to be sure, and the answer didn't change. We didn't want people lingering near our house. We didn't trust strangers to treat those graves with respect. And honestly, we just wanted to enjoy the property we had just bought without turning it into a public attraction. My husband sent a polite but firm email declining the proposal and thought that would be the end of it. They called again a few days later trying a different angle. Maybe just limited access hours, one of them suggested. Another mentioned liability protections and community goodwill. Each conversation felt less like a request and more like a slow push. My husband kept repeating the same things. We've made our decision. It's private property. After the third call, we stopped answering. Then things got messy. The next day, someone posted in our town's buy-sell-trade Facebook group accusing us of denying people access to their family members' graves. The post was written like we were locking the gates on grieving relatives, painting us as these cold, selfish outsiders who didn't care about history or family ties. Within hours, it had dozens of comments, and not the friendly kind. I read it out loud to my husband, and he just shook his head. "This isn't random," he said. "Someone's trying to push us." We did some digging and found out that the woman who made the post was related to one of the council members. Not just distantly either, it was his sister-in-law. And after going through some records, it turned out that her great-great-aunt was buried in that cemetery. So suddenly this wasn't about a trail anymore. This was personal, and they were using the town to pressure us. We messaged her privately, trying to keep things calm. "Hey," I wrote, "we understand you have family buried there, but the post you made is causing a lot of unnecessary hostility. We're not denying access to anyone specifically. We just don't want public traffic through our property. Could you please take it down?" Her response came fast. "No, people deserve access to their family. You're being selfish." My husband took the phone and typed back, "We're not stopping anyone from respectfully arranging access. We're stopping a public trail. There's a difference." She didn't care. The post stayed up, and the comments kept piling on. Over the next couple of days, we started getting messages. Some were passive-aggressive, others were straight-up nasty. People we'd never met were suddenly experts on what we owed the community. One guy actually wrote, "You shouldn't have bought land with history if you didn't want to share it." Another told us we were disrespecting the dead, which is ironic considering we were the only ones actually maintaining the graves. This is the ugly truth about small-town pressure campaigns. They don't need facts. They just need a narrative. Outsiders keeping families from their ancestors' graves sounds terrible, and it would be, if it were true. That's when we stopped being polite. We talked to a lawyer and explained the situation, including the post, the pressure from the council, and the growing harassment. He didn't even hesitate. "They're pushing a narrative that could affect your property rights," he said. "You need to shut it down now." So we sent a formal notice. It wasn't a friendly message this time. It was a legal one outlining that her public claims could be interpreted as interfering with our right to quiet title and quiet enjoyment of our property. It also made it very clear that if the harassment continued, we were prepared to take further action. We didn't bluff, we documented everything. Funny how quickly things changed after that. The Facebook post disappeared within a few hours. The messages stopped almost overnight. Even the council suddenly went quiet, like they had collectively decided they had better things to do. No follow-ups, no friendly check-ins, nothing. Now the cemetery is exactly what it was when we bought the place, quiet, tucked away, and respected. We still maintain it, keep it clean, and treat it with care, but it's not a public walkway, and it's not a tourist stop. Every now and then, I think about how quickly people tried to turn our home into something it wasn't. It's amazing how generous others can be with property that isn't theirs. The one that stings the most, story 1. The middle school admin created their own chaos, and the council learned that a lawyer's letter ends a Facebook war faster than any comment thread. But Diana's betrayal was personal. She didn't just make a bad policy or push a bad idea. She took someone who trusted her, used her, discarded her, and then asked for a favor. That's not incompetence. That's something else entirely. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.